Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, we did want to direct your attention to the slide that's on your screen. Due to the format of our webinar, we do regret that dial-in audio is not available for the first portion of this webinar. So if you did use a dial-in bridge, you will not be able to hear the first half hour of the webinar. If you would like to listen on your mobile device, you can download the GoToWebinar app from the Android or Apple store, and you'll be able to listen on your phone in that manner. If you are not able to download the app, rest assured this webinar will be available for on-demand viewing at the Broadband USA website no later than August 18th. Thank you, and we'll begin shortly.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Broadband USA's webinar. I am Margaret Gutierrez with Ntia's Broadband USA program. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to NTIA's Broadband USA program website. Today's webinar focuses on NTIA's Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. First, we will open up the webinar for questions after the completion of the presentations. As you hear from each presenter, please use the question box on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your questions or comments. Second, the presentation, along with a transcript and audio recording of today's session, will be available on the Broadband USA website within 7 days of this webinar under the Events, Past Events tab. Finally, please visit our Broadband USA website for information about our technical assistance program, including useful guides, products, publications, and other tools that can assist you with planning, funding, and implementing your broadband project. We provide updated information, including our monthly newsletter and other broadband news. I would like to provide you with a brief background on each of our presenters today. Vanessa Crushy is part of our Broadband USA team here at NTIA, and she's a broadband program specialist. She's also a citizen of the Navajo Nation, born and raised in Shiprock, New Mexico. She currently resides in Sacramento, California. Vanessa serves as one of NTIA's broadband program specialists, and she has more than 20 years of experience in public health management, a Master of Social Work degree from Washington University in St. Louis, and a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of Southern California. Crystal Hoddaway comes to us from the Makah tribe located in Washington State. For 12 years, Crystal served as the grants writer for her tribe with a focus on state and federal grants in addition to her grant writing duties. Crystal is also detailed to the Makah tribe Tribal Broadband project, which entailed not only a wireless network deployment, but also negotiations with industry. And she was very active with the national, regional, and statewide policy groups. Amanda Perea is an environmental and NEPA specialist with more than 19 years of experience. She has worked on a variety of environmental and social issues, including environmental compliance, community development, socioeconomic impact analysis, and in urban master planning. Her work particularly focuses on compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, which is known as NEPA, as well as other environmental and historic preservation laws through developing the NEPA documents, developing program strategies, supporting compliance activities, drafting technical documents, and conducting training on regulatory compliance. She has served as a project manager, a lead author, and also a subject matter expert on numerous environmental impact statements. Those are called EISs. And environmental assessments, or EAs, and she has worked extensively on NEPA for federal grants, including VTOP and Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant programs. Jana Waters is a member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. She grew up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation and is a graduate from the Hardin High School in Hardin, Montana. She also earned an Associate of Arts degree from Dawson Community College in Glendive, Montana. And from there, she attended Jamestown College in Jamestown, North Dakota, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics. Jana has worked for BIA for 19 years and has always been in trust services. Her career began with the Land Titles and Records Office as a legal instruments examiner, where she familiarized herself with the basics of trust property and trust responsibility. She then continued her career as a realty specialist with an emphasis in mineral leasing activities. She has served on several teams in her capacity as a realty specialist: the TAMS Minor User Group, various Indian Energy and Minerals Steering Committee work groups, and the Fluid Minerals Handbook team. In addition, she has served in acting capacities to broaden her knowledge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and trust activities. These positions include Regional Realty Officer and Deputy Superintendent of Trust Services. Nicholas Courtney is an enrolled member of the Makah tribe. Nick earned his bachelor and master's degree from Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, and was raised in Auburn, Washington on Muckleshoot tribal lands. Before joining us at Ntia, Nicholas served as the Director of Policy at the National Congress of American Indians, also known as NCAI, the oldest, largest, and most represented American Indian and Alaska Native organization, serving the broad interests of tribal government and communities. Previous to working at NCAI, Nicholas served as Program Director for the Native American Political Leadership Program at George Washington University. Adam Geisler is a National Tribal Government Liaison with the First Responder Network Authority, serving Western tribes in FEMA Regions 9 and 10. He is a member of the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians near San Diego, California, and has served in an elected leadership role with his tribe running tribal government and shaping national policy in public health, transportation, economic development, and housing for over a decade. He has led his tribe through 4 federally declared disasters, has served as vice chairman and founding board member of the Intertribal Long-Term Recovery Foundation, a disaster response and recovery organization, and is a recipient of the International Wireless Communications Under 40 Leadership Award. Gabe Montoya is an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Pewaukee located in northern New Mexico. He has served on tribal council for 27 years and on the board of directors for the tribe's economic development. He brings over 10 years of experience in tribal broadband to NTIA, including his service as a board member and chairman for ReadyNet, regional multi-governmental JPA collaboration, which was set on bridging the digital divide to bring broadband services at affordable prices to their constituents for the good of their communities. My name is Margaret Gutierrez, and I will be your moderator. I am an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. I spent 10 years with the Awakaliente Band of Kuya Indians as the Director of Emergency Services. I am the first Native American graduate of the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Homeland Defense and Security Program, and I hold a master's degree in security studies. I am an instructor for FEMA's Emergency Management Institute tribal curriculum and a professor in the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Emergency Management at Cal State University, Long Beach. I am a National Tribal Liaison for FirstNet, and I serve as the principal point of contact for tribes in FirstNet FEMA regions 1 through 8. I am currently on detail to NTA working on this Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program. Today's agenda will review the expected timeline, the top 10 questions regarding the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program, questions and answers from our partners, and then some time for question and answers at the end. At this time, I would like to pass this over to Adam Geisler to review the expected timeline.
Well, thank you, Margaret. And nom Adam Geisler. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Adam Geisler, and I'm a citizen and enrolled member of the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, located here in Southern California. And I'm teleworking today to provide some additional content regarding the expected timeline for our webinar. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. With regards to the expected timeline, let's talk a little bit about what we've done so far. There has been plenty of pre-application activities that have gone on, but I wanted to highlight a few of them that are really critical to make sure that you're aware of as you're working through your applications. Please verify that your SAM.gov registration is up to date and that the information that's located within SAMS and within grants.gov matches your eligible entity's DUNS number and EIN. And again, we also want to highlight that you need to be sure that you've obtained grants.gov workspace access, because that's going to be critical for your ability to submit the application. In addition to that, we want to again encourage you to take a look at that Nofo and make sure that you are gathering all the requirements listed in the Nofo to include programmatic documentation and standard forms. Again, if you check out the Nofo, we have very clear documentation that we're looking for, whether you're submitting for broadband use and adoption, broadband infrastructure, or both broadband use and adoption. Please take a look at that section one more time and double check. In addition, I want to thank everybody for your continued engagement and participation. We have engaged in monthly webinars that have had over 400 plus participants from across Indian country, and this program and the FAQs that we've developed wouldn't be where they're at without your participation. So we want to thank you again for your participation in the webinars. For those of you that this is your first webinar, I want to highlight that as you're working through your application, we have we're not pre-recorded, but we have videos that we have since recorded and placed on our website to help you through all the different parameters of the program, whether your questions are around what's eligible activities in the program, or you're literally wanting to go step by step on how to fill out the forms, or you're thinking about hot topics around permitting or workforce development. We have some great resources on our website, so please go check out the webinars that we've already held because our recordings are posted. And again, thank you to those of you that have been participating with us in those. In addition, I want to say a big thank you to all of our regional partners, the BIA regional offices, the regional tribal organizations, even our partner states that have been out there really helping to provide a platform for engagement while we have been going through the technical assistance side of this program. So again, thank you so much for your participation and helping us to make this a better program and providing a platform for us to answer questions. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the submission of what a full application in grants.gov entails. So applications really need to be complete, and we're going to ask that you make sure that we're not missing any of the critical documentation. And again, if you look in the Nofo, it specifically outlines what's needed for broadband use and adoption, broadband infrastructure, and also if you're applying for both, you'll need to make sure that you submit the forms from both of those categories. I also want to highlight again for everybody that yes, you can submit a narrative for broadband infrastructure and another narrative for broadband use and adoption. Just please make sure that you do not go over the page count of 20 pages for either of those narratives. Again, 20 pages for broadband infrastructure, 20 pages for broadband use and adoption, single space. Also, the application date deadline is approaching, and we are close. September 1st, 2021 at 11:59 Pacific Daylight Time is the cutoff. So please, can you please make sure you get your applications in before then? If you can get it in a week early, we'd love to see that as well. But again, drop dead deadline for submission is September 1st, 2021 at 11:59 Pacific Daylight Time. Also, applications can be submitted through grants.gov, but we realize that there are some of you out there that may need to submit it through another format. And I just again wanted to highlight to you that we will accept applications via email as well as through traditional post mail. If that is the submission process that you're looking at, please reach out to me directly. Again, my name is Adam Geisler. I'm the name listed as the point of contact for the programmatic elements of the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program within the Nofo. So please submit an email or drop me a phone call and let me know if you're planning on submitting through one of those alternative methods. Okay, so let's get into the third bucket here. So what happens after we get these applications in? And we know they're going to be amazing. We're looking forward to seeing them. We're going to run it through a few review processes. First, we're going to check the eligibility of the application or of the applicant. We want to make sure that eligible entities are who's applying for this program. And for those of you that are having a question mark around, am I an eligible entity? I'm going to go ahead and have you take a look at the Nofo in the definition section, because eligible entity is a specific legal term within the Nofo that we want you to take a look at. So we're going to make sure you're eligible, number one. After we double check the eligibility of the applicant, we're then going to run through a merit review process and make sure that the merit itself of the application meets the requirements that we have within the Nofo. Once we move through our merit review process and ensure that the eligible activities in there are correct and that we don't have anything that doesn't belong within the application, we're then going to send it into a more detailed review within the programmatic review process and really get into the nuts and bolts of the application itself and double check on everything from budgets to narratives to environmental narrative components as well. And here's something I want to highlight with everybody. We will reach out to you with questions on your application if we have questions. Again, our intent is to try to work through and cure these applications, and we're going to go ahead and reach out and ask you questions as appropriate during any one of these review processes to make sure that we're understanding the application and to work through any of the pieces that we may lack clarification on, whether it's documentation or it's specific language that you're using within the narrative, or if it's something within the forms that we need to pay a little bit more attention to and talk through. All right, so we made it pretty clear, I think, on what we're going to do once we get your application. So let's talk about the selection process. The Assistant Secretary of Commerce will select and recommend applications for funding to NOAA, the NOAA grants officer. NOAA is housed within the Department of Commerce, and that is actually the grants office for the Department of Commerce, for those of you that are wondering why NOAA. So again, the Assistant Secretary will go ahead and select and make final recommendations to the grants officer over at NOAA. And from there, we'll go ahead and go through review, select, and award processing by November 29th of 2021. From there, we will then move into a start date for awards, which we expect to be around December 13th of 2021 at the earliest. And again, we're crossing our fingers here. We're going to do everything we can to hit that timeline. So again, December 13th, 2021 is the start date for awards to be expected at the earliest. All right, so now let's get into the fun part. We have an exciting group of participants here today, and within the Tribal Broadband Connectivity team, I'm really excited to have my peers here. We wanted to make sure, as we kicked off this question and answer segment of the webinar, that we touched on a few of the high points. In particular, the team came up with a top 10 questions and answers that we have been seeing as you've been sending in your questions, that we just thought we'd lead off and go ahead and get the juices moving a little bit before we jump into the live Q&A. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Montoya, and thanks again.
Will federal agencies expedite the permitting process required within the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, that this grant requires? The answer to that question is NTIA is continuing to work with its federal agencies to fulfill the permitting requirements in a timely manner. NTIA's Broadband USA website includes links to all the federal agencies' permitting websites. Additionally, on July 22nd, 2021, NTIA and the Bureau of Indian Affairs co-hosted a webinar on hot topics pertaining to the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program application. This presentation included information about the National Historic Preservation Act, also known as NHPA, and the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA, and permitting.
Hi, Crystal Hoddaway here. So this question, the Nofo states that NTIA will allocate up to $500,000 to each tribal government. Does this mean that tribes will receive $500,000 regardless of the application they submit? So the answer to that, no. The tribal government must submit a single application by the application deadline to be eligible for program funding and propose a project consisting of eligible broadband infrastructure deployment and/or broadband use and adoption activities. So the applicant must include a budget narrative as well as a detailed budget justification consisting of allowable costs associated with the proposed project activities. The grant applicant must follow the application instructions outlined in Section D of the Nofo, and each application will be reviewed and scored against the evaluation criteria set forth in Sections E1 and/or E2 of the Nofo. We also want you to note that this grant program is not a formula or block grant program. And furthermore, the $500,000 allocation, it is not a funding cap. So for this question, can a tribal government apply for both Tribal Broadband Connectivity and the Broadband Infrastructure Grant Programs? These are excellent questions. So the answer, eligible applicants for NTIA Broadband Infrastructure Program are covered partnerships, which means a partnership between a state or one or more political subdivisions of a state, and B, a provider of fixed broadband service. So if the tribal government is considered a political subdivision of a state and can provide a citation to specific state law that authorizes or establishes it as a political subdivision of the state in its grant application, then it may be eligible to apply to the Broadband Infrastructure Program as part of a covered partnership that must also include a fixed broadband service provider.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Courtney. Our next question is my tribal government eligible to apply if I am a partner, subawardee, or contractor on a grant that was awarded under the Federal Communications Commission's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund funding initiative? Well, the answer is yes, as long as there is no duplication of activities or costs in the proposed project. NTIA will also coordinate with the FCC on the status of proposed RDOF projects in order to understand if areas of proposed projects are descoped or projects are no longer eligible for federal funding. However, a tribal government may not certify that tribal lands that will receive service under an enforceable build-out commitment as unserved, as those terms are defined in section A2G and A2O of the Nofo. A tribal government must disclose whether it has terminated an existing agreement qualifying as an enforceable build-out commitment in anticipation of receiving funding under the Tbcp. Thanks.
Can funds for infrastructure be used to overbuild an existing broadband provider who provides 25.3? Section 905C8 of the Act directs eligible entities to prioritize the construction of new broadband infrastructure proposals that will serve currently unserved households. NTIA permits tribal governments to self-certify the unserved status of the proposed service areas within tribal lands. The lands providing services to tribal members with a description of how the tribal government determined the area is unserved. Given this prioritization, NTIA does not expect to fund projects focused on overbuilding an existing broadband provider qualifying broadband service as defined in section A2J of the Nofo. 25.3 is the speed with low latency.
Hi, I'm Vanessa, and I am going to be asking the next question. If asking for an extension, should we include the longer timeline provided in the application? Meaning, when showing our timeline, can we present one for longer than 1 year? The Act requires eligible entities to complete their projects within 1 year of the receipt of grant funds. However, applicants in their proposal should plan to spend funds within 1 year. The Assistant Secretary, however, may extend the award period for broadband infrastructure construction projects if the eligible entity certifies that 1, it has a plan for the use of the grant funds, 2, the construction project is underway, or 3, extenuating circumstances require an extension of time to allow the project to be completed. With respect to infrastructure projects, the eligible entity may submit a request for an extension of the 1 year award period with its application, or no later than 90 calendar days before the end of the award period. The eligible entity should explain in its extension request how much additional time it will need to fully complete its broadband infrastructure project.
Our next question is, can eligible entities use these funds to subsidize tribal members' commercial broadband services? The answer is yes. Funds may be used to provide affordable broadband programs, including providing free or reduced cost broadband service and preventing disconnection of existing broadband service. You can see section D7 of the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program Nofo for additional information on eligible costs. Thanks.
All right, this is a good one. So, question 8, regarding possible broadband adoption and use projects, does application of the 1 year completion deadline effectively mean that any program initiated to reduce the monthly cost of qualifying broadband services to the consumers can only last a period of 1 year? that it must conclude at the end of the 1-year completion period? Question mark. Or could monthly reduced pricing discounts continue for a longer period? We have an answer for that. I want to thank the legal team here at Ntia for putting this together. So let's answer that question. A broadband service costs are allowable beyond the 1-year time frame as long as the costs and terms are reasonable, eligible under the Nofo, and the grantee makes full payment for that service during the grant's 1-year period of performance. If an applicant intends to use grant funds in this way, the applicant must include a detailed description of such proposed costs in its application, including the proposed period of service. NTIA may include a specific award condition in any such award to ensure that the funds are used appropriately and to ensure that if the service is canceled and/or the grantee receives a refund, any grant funds returned to the grantee are subsequently returned to the federal government. So again, NTIA may include a specific award condition here in any such award to ensure that the funds are used appropriately and to ensure that if the service is canceled and/or the grantee receives a refund, any grant funds returned to the grantee are subsequently returned to the federal government. We'll go ahead and turn it over to the next question. Just kidding, it's me again. Question 9. What methods could be used for the tribe to self-certify that they are unserved? Well, we got an answer for you. We've gotten this quite a bit. Section 905C8 of the Act directs eligible entities to prioritize the construction of new broadband infrastructure proposals that will serve currently unserved households. NTIA will permit tribes to self-certify the unserved status of proposed service areas within tribal lands and lands providing services to tribal members, with a description of how the tribe determined that the area is unserved. Tribes can use a variety of data to demonstrate that the area is unserved, including federal data found in NTIA's public-facing National Broadband Availability Map, also known as NBAM, state or regional-based data, and tribal or local data, including surveys and speed test data. Well, there you go. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to my colleague, Vanessa. Vanessa?
Next question. If I am applying for the broadband infrastructure deployment and broadband use and adoption projects, am I only limited to 20 pages single space or 40 pages double space? No, if you're applying for both projects, you could allocate a total of 40 pages single space or 80 pages double space. The 20 single or 40 double space page limit is per project. Now we're going to hand over our presentation to our partners at the BIA and FirstNet for some additional questions and answers.
Hi, I'm Jana Waters. I'm a realty specialist with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And one of our frequent questions that we've been getting is, how do I find out where my Bureau of Indian Affairs service area is? Well, you can find your BIA region here by clicking on that hot link. And it's also on the Bureau of Indian Affairs website, www.bia.gov. Within that page, you can search by zip code, state, and/or tribe name at the right-hand side.
All right, so the next question is, what are the key components to be included in a narrative to provide NTIA with what it needs to determine environmental compliance? So we're going to talk about a few factors here. A good project description needs to provide NTIA with sufficient information to make an initial determination about EHP compliance requirements. So the first thing you want to describe is what the project is. So for example, construction of a 150-foot monopole communication tower. You want to use clear, descriptive language. You want to make sure that you're factually describing the scale, scope, and content of the project. So next, you want to describe where the project is proposed. Now, there are two versions of where that we're talking about. One is the physical location. So that's going to be either a street address or a latitude and longitude if street address isn't available. And the other is going to be including a physical description of the surroundings and the site area. So is it on developed land versus open space? Are there adjacent natural resources such as rivers, wetlands, forests? Are there any protected lands? Are there any lands that are owned by tribes, federal agencies, state agencies, county agencies? All of these things will provide NTIA with an idea of the types of coordination that may be required as part of the EHP process. While you're there, we also would like for you to include ground level and aerial photographs and project plan drawings if you have them. All of these things are very useful in terms of providing that context that we need to properly evaluate your project. For new construction projects, we ask that you include a floodplain map from the FEMA Map Service Center. Those are available for free download, and we've provided the URL here. And also a wetlands map from the Fish and Wildlife Service's National Wetlands Inventory, also available for free download at the URL provided. If you have questions or concerns about how to produce these maps, please do let us know. We'd be happy to help walk you through the process. Next, we'd like you to describe how the project will be implemented, again, using very straightforward, plain descriptive language. So for example, requiring 1 acre of ground disturbance at an approximate depth of 5 feet and the installation of a concrete pad, an equipment shed, an emergency generator, and a 1,000-gallon above ground fuel storage tank. Please be aware that many projects, or even most projects, will have EHP requirements that will need to be completed post-award. This should not be considered an obstacle to successful grant execution. Awardees will be required to complete these EHP requirements prior to beginning the project, and EHP requirements are an allowable use of grant funds. In addition, there will be technical support available. This is not something that you're going to have to navigate on your own. We are here to help you. And with that, I will hand it to the next presenter.
Thank you, Jana and Amanda, for joining us. Now I'm going to send it back over to Margaret for questions and answers. Thank you.
I'm going to send it back over to Margaret.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So before we jump into question and answer, Adam is going to do a quick acknowledgement.
Yeah, so can you hear me okay? Just a quick thumbs up, we good? All right. Gotta love this virtual environment. Thank you everybody for your patience. Today, we just wanted to quickly acknowledge that one of our peers from the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Jana Waters, who you just saw a moment ago in the recording, is actually unable to make it with us today as her community is being impacted by the wildfires. So for those of you that send good thoughts or prayers or put tobacco out or however you do what you do, we just want to acknowledge that she's going through that and that she isn't able to join us today and send those positive thoughts her way. So with that, Margaret, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer part of the webinar. If you haven't already done so, please remember to type your questions or comments into the question box on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will try to get through as many as we can. So our first question is for Adam. What is the definition of unserved, and within an eligible applicant's Tbcp application, how should the percentage of unserved homes be documented? For example, if 50% of homes in our eligible lands do not have access to broadband and our proposal solves this 50%, should we indicate that we are serving 50% of households or 100% of households?
That's a great question, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that this program, when we're talking about percentage of unserved households, is exactly that, indicating the percentage of all those unserved and what percentage you're planning on serving of those that are unserved. So let's read the definition really quick for the definition of unserved when it relates to this program. So unserved with respect to a household means, and this is on page 9 of the Nofo in the definition section, The household lacks access to qualifying broadband service. Qualifying broadband service is a term, is another legal definition. 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. So lacking access to 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. And no broadband provider has been selected to receive or is otherwise receiving federal or state funding subject to enforceable build-out commitments to deploy qualifying broadband service in the specific area where the household is located by date certain, even if such service is not yet available, provided that the federal or state agency providing the funding has not deemed the service provider to be in default of its build-out obligations under the applicable federal or state program. I'm going to do something that you probably should never do, but I know some folks are a little bit more visual. So if we're talking about your community, and let's just call both hands here your reservation or your tribal lands. If this portion of your community is already served, don't bother talking about that in your application because it's already served, right? They already have 25.3. So if you're going to write an application about serving 100% of what's remaining, that's what we're talking about in terms of those that are unserved by 25.3. So focus your language in your application around how much of the area you are serving. Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Is it 100%? And focus on the area that is unserved today. Horrible example probably, but hopefully it was helpful for some. Tried something new. Thanks, Margaret.
You're not off the hook yet, Adam. Question for you. Can we budget funding to help with building costs of our clinic that will serve as a regional health center hub, providing superior care that is supported by digital exam rooms and a technologically advanced equipment, which are vital for successful telehealth implementation? This is especially important for our tribal communities that can only be reached by boat or plane and not able to leave their community due to weather or increased COVID-19 restrictions.
This sounds like a question out of Alaska if I was going to place a bet. Here's the answer. It depends. And it really depends on how you approach the language that you're using in the application and how it fits within the eligible activities that we've identified in the Nofo. So for those of you that are wondering, where can I quickly go to see what the eligible activities are in the Nofo? It starts on page 31. So if you go to page 31, at the top of the page A, eligible uses for the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program. By the time you make your way over to page 32, we then get into more detail regarding broadband infrastructure deployment, as well as eligible costs specific to broadband adoption and use activities. So if you're looking to do some construction activities or purchase equipment that's supporting, in this example, telehealth, what I'm going to encourage you to do is look at the language in the Nofo, think about how it's applicable, and then make your case as to why you believe it's an eligible activity.
Thank you. Gabe, is building construction allowed under the adoption and use category? It would be for minor renovations to create a telehealth and education facility where all can access broadband.
Thank you, Margaret, for that question. I know this question has come up quite a bit. So the best way to answer it is just come out of the Nofo language. In the Nofo, it says recipients may generally use these grant funds to acquire broadband-related equipment, instrumentation, networking capability, hardware, software, and other digital technology for broadband services, telehealth, and remote education. Provide affordable broadband programs, including providing free or reduced cost broadband service for preventing disconnection of existing broadband service. III, provide digital training, education, technology support, outreach, and awareness programs, including curricula and web-based resources. 4, facilitate access to broadband services, including public computer centers, public Wi-Fi networks, broadband in public housing, improvement of broadband services and equipment in schools, libraries, health centers, workforce development centers, and other tribal anchor institutions. And 5 says, implement affordable broadband programs that facilitate a greater access to broadband services, devices, and equipment to prevent disconnection of existing broadband services.
Thank you. Adam, we are a non-reservation based tribe where each location of tribal land is considered to be a single node on the tribe's wide area network. Because these locations are interconnected using the PUD's fiber infrastructure, We need to provide the proper equipment in order to segregate the tribe's VLANs. Is this considered infrastructure, or do I need to submit to applications?
All right, so let's work our way backwards here a little bit. Number one, each eligible entity is only allowed to submit one application under its DUNS EIN numbers, right? When you're submitting that into grants.gov, okay? So whether you're applying for broadband adoption and use, I'm using my hands again, sorry, or broadband infrastructure, both of those go into the application when you submit it. And both of those, as Vanessa mentioned earlier, get a 20-page narrative for broadband use and adoption and a 20-page narrative for single space for broadband infrastructure. Now, with that being said, in terms of, there's a couple things that I think are very nuanced in here, and so I want to be careful on how we're responding to this. So a non-reservation based tribe where each location of tribal land is considered to be a single node. So I'm assuming you are double checking your eligibility in terms of being an eligible entity, one, which it sounds like you are, and two, that you are looking at what the definition of tribal land is in terms of, especially with relationship to infrastructure, that's important. So as long as you've gone through and you're checking those boxes and you believe that those things, that you believe those fit, then let's take it into the next part of this conversation. Not understanding the details of what you're preparing in your application, but looking at the generalities that I see here. You're talking about upgrading existing infrastructure to be able to support last mile connections to, I'm assuming, tribal households or anchor institutions. And the question that I really have for you that it doesn't seem like we have in there that needs to be clear is there service to those households or anchor institutions today? One, does that service, is it currently providing 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up? That's two. If there is not service of 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up, then you're gonna hear us all say this a lot with these questions that we see coming in. Take a look at page 31 and 32 in the Nofo, because upgrading existing infrastructure in order to deliver 25.3 or greater is an eligible expense, and that includes the backhaul components needed in order to provide that service. So if you are trying to light up areas of your community that do not have 25.3, and you have to upgrade your backhaul and infrastructure in order to do that, that's an eligible activity. But here's the last part that I want to leave you with that's important. Writing an application just to upgrade the backhaul and not tying it to the last mile connection, not tying it to the people that you're serving that do not have access today, that are unserved, that do not have access to 25.3, I'm going to caution you around that. The whole point of this program, on the infrastructure side especially, is to get service to households, we put a priority on that do not have 25.3 access. So please keep that in mind as you're thinking through the dynamics of your application.
Thank you, Adam. Gabe, there is a company offering a very expensive, very exclusive fiber connection coming into our community, which does technically speaking provide 25.3 broadband access to customers through a local vendor. However, the service is cost prohibitive and thus not available to most families. How should we frame our proposal to deploy a tribally owned broadband service that overcomes this availability and cost limitations and offers a wide range of services, including a basic free internet and guaranteed affordability, the associated benefits of building this tribally owned telecommunications company?
Thank you, Margaret. That question alone sounds like the proposal. I think it's all listed right there, which is actually a very interesting way to move forward. I would like to emphasize the Tbcp allows for the flexibility of the tribe to decide what fits the tribe, how do they deliver to their community. You know, as Adam said, 25.3 is the benchmark we're looking for. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of people within our different tribes that we don't have those connectivity to those to those tribes that we just can't, they're not affordable for people. So we would encourage, you look at your speeds to make 25.3, you detail your proposal, whether it's broadband use and adoption, you use that opportunity, as well as infrastructure to build something more robust, whether the tribe chooses to do an ISP, that's up to the tribe to do. And be sure to look out for your enforceable build out commitments. You need to, this program does not cover duplication, so make sure you're not servicing the same areas within the proposal. We're minimizing duplication, we don't need duplication, I guess is what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, can we establish a competitive tribal ISP within an existing high-cost private commercial backhaul infrastructure?
Again, there's a lot of what ifs. I mean, this is a big maybe. Not knowing all the details of your application and not knowing who you're talking about, whether there's a couple things that you got to consider here. And I think Gabe touched on this just a moment ago with the last question, but let's double down on this a little bit. So can a tribe establish a competitive tribal ISP? I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's something that it would be an eligible activity if that's something that is your prerogative, and that's how you feel that that it meets the tribe's needs. Now let's look at the rest of the question. Within an existing high-cost private commercial backhaul infrastructure, there's a lot of questions that I have when I read that. The first thing that makes me really the first thing I want to ask is, do you already have an enforceable build-out commitment with that backhaul provider where they're guaranteeing you service? And again, enforceable build-out commitment, as Gabe mentioned, and you're going to hear me say, it's a legal term actually in our Nofo, right? That actually means something on whether or not you have an enforceable build-out commitment, and essentially that implies that you have a resolution in place with whoever that backhaul provider is. If you don't have an enforceable build-out commitment, I'm gonna basically say take a look at our FAQs on the website. We have 3 sets of them because we address how you work if there's an existing service provider there. But if there's not an enforceable build-out commitment, that gives the tribe the flexibility to either negotiate with that service provider for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, or find an alternative path that you want to explore in order to pursue that last mile solution of affordable access. So I apologize for parsing up the question a little bit, but I think we kind of have to do that. Again, not knowing all the details in terms of what you're doing or what the environment is, but at a high level, hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you. Nick, some broadband funding programs require the winning providers to also offer landline phone service. Is there anything similar here?
Thank you for that question. It's a great one with a simple answer. No, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program does not require the winning providers to also offer landline phone services.
Thank you. Vanessa, is there a specific way we should number or format items in the project narrative, such as resume, environmental review documents, etc.? Are appendices acceptable?
Unmuted.
You will need to include page numbers on the project narrative. The page number limit does not include resumes and environmental review documentation. You're welcome to include page numbers on the additional documentation, but it should be uploaded separately as an attachment in the grants.gov. If you're submitting a paper application via email or postal mail, the additional documentation can be submitted as a part of your appendix.
Let's, Margaret, Vanessa, we're having a little bit of audio there, but if you don't mind, we'll just repeat that one more time. So I think what she was saying was, you will need to include page numbers on the project narrative. The page number limit does not include resumes and environmental review documentation. You're welcome to include page numbers on the additional documentation, but should be uploaded separately as an attachment in grants.gov. And if you are submitting a paper application via email or post mail, the additional documentation can be submitted as part of an appendix.
Thank you, Adam. Adam, while you're up, the option for fiber is not feasible for many years to our rural Alaska community. We have a Tribal Spectrum 2.5 application being processed and expect approval, which could serve as a last mile option. However, with LEO coming online for Alaska, first OneWeb later this year and Starlink early next year, it seems the simplest approach could be setting up each of our community buildings, homes, businesses, governments, etc., with one of these LEO services that would include purchasing the equipment for each building and some form of service voucher for service payment for the first year and perhaps partial service payments thereafter for a reasonable time. If this approach is an acceptable use, would this fall under broadband use and adoption or broadband infrastructure deployment, since equipment would be purchased for each home?
You have a little bit of a hybrid in the example. Okay, this is Alaska for sure, right? Yeah, it's right there in the question. Okay, so first let's start off with one thing that's I think most important. This program is really about providing a service that the eligible entities want and need and view as a long-term, affordable, scalable, accessible solution for their broadband needs to solve that digital divide once and for all, right? So I want to encourage everybody to look at solutions that are not, and I'm not implying that this is a band-aid, but I do want to encourage everybody to make sure that they're looking at what the solution is that makes sense for them long-term, because that's really what this program is about. This is not about piecemealing things together. This is about really addressing what the issue is. So with that being said, in terms of an example of LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites, you guys have probably heard a lot about these. You know, part of this is that it depends. If you are using satellite infrastructure in order to be the pipe, the backhaul, the middle mile access in order to then light up your 2.5 spectrum in this example, then that would be essentially a construction activity, right? You're going to have to run, you're going to have to build up some sort of piece of equipment, tower, a place to receive where that pipe is coming into, that satellite pipe, and then you're going to propagate that signal out. So that's a construction activity. However, we also know that there are instances where you can receive service directly to your house, right? There isn't a need to necessarily deploy over 2.5 spectrum, and you can just purchase the service like you would, like some providers do today. In that instance, that's more of a subsidy of services, right? You're not having to build out infrastructure that may require environmental review, and in that instance, you're essentially just subsidizing and acquiring service. So I really want to encourage you to think about in this instance, it could be construction or it could be broadband use and adoption. You just need to delineate what it is you're doing. So if you're doing 2.5 deployment and you're using LEO backhaul, that's probably going to be a infrastructure construction project. If you're just buying service and putting a radio on the side of the house, like many other people do in rural areas to get service, you're subsidizing service and equipment, which is a different conversation, and that would be broadband use and adoption. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I think we got to parse that out a little bit, and hopefully that makes sense.
I would also remind people, if you have specific situations like that, you're welcome to send us an email, get us on the phone, and we can detail that conversation out as well, because some of these are just difficult to answer and get into the details that need to be talked about. Crystal, if tribal lands are served by another provider, but the tribe is planning on building in the area, can they be considered unserved?
Thank you for that question. You know, I would have to ask a lot more questions back to the applicant themselves. So, for instance, are all the community members being served? Are they all receiving qualifying broadband service? Does the tribal plans include all community members? If not, and then, you know, there's also a lot of talk about consent, tribal consent. So the questions I'm giving back to you, those will help you develop your application and guide your application route. So please, if that didn't answer you all the way, then please feel free to reach out to us directly.
Thank you. Nick, can multiple years of technical support and maintenance of the infrastructure deployment be included in this grant?
Hey, thank you so much for that question. So the Act requires eligible entities to complete their projects within 1 year of their receipt of grant funds. Therefore, applicants in their proposals should plan to spend their funds within 1 year. The Assistant Secretary, however, may extend the award period for broadband infrastructure construction projects if the eligible entity certifies that 1, it has a plan for the use of grant funds, 2, the construction project is underway, or 3, extenuating circumstances require an extension of time to allow the project to be completed. With respect to broadband infrastructure projects, the eligible entity may submit a request for an extension of the 1-year period with its application, or not later than 90 calendar days before the end of the award period. The eligible entity should explain in that extension request how much additional time it will need to fully complete the broadband infrastructure project. With that said, broadband service costs are allowable beyond their 1-year timeframe as long as the costs and terms are reasonable, eligible under the Nofo, and the grantee makes full payment for that service during the grant's 1-year period of performance. If an applicant intends to use grant funds in this way, the applicant must include a detailed description of such proposed costs in its application, including the proposed period of service. We at NTIA may include a specific award condition in any such award to ensure that the funds are used appropriately and to ensure that the service is canceled and/or grantee receives a refund. Also, any grant funds returned to the grantee are subsequently returned to the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Adam, your question 8 on your slide. How many years is a reasonable contract term? Let's do that one more time.
Okay, I think and Nick just kind of covered that. It depends. I mean, if you have something that is affordable that you're putting down where you're essentially purchasing service into the future, again, that's an allowable thing. If you want to go beyond the 1 year, we just are going to evaluate the reasonableness of the request and make sure that it's something that fits within the reasonable costs and service within your area. And we get that question a lot, actually, right? I think, Crystal, the team has been talking about, how are folks looking at what's affordable and how do we look at what's reasonable in our feasibility studies? And, at the end of the day, guys, if you're in what's a low-hanging fruit? If you're in California, but you're using Alaska pricing, we're probably going to have to talk to you about that, right? Because there's a big gap, right? There's a big delta there, and that may not be considered reasonable. But if you're in Alaska and you're using reasonable comps of Alaska pricing, then we're probably going to take a look, have a quick conversation, and if it makes sense and it's reasonable, we'll move on. So again, it's all relative based upon where you are and what is reasonable today, what are the services and the cost for those services and where you're at. So, keep it local, keep it regional, and we shouldn't have too many issues around that particular discussion point.
Thank you. Skokomish is working on an application that includes 2 broadband projects. One is for laying fiber to homes, and the other is to put an antenna on the water tower to provide Wi-Fi to community members. Would these both be considered infrastructure deployment projects? If so, should the narrative be written as 2 separate projects or 1 single project? Vanessa.
So applicants may propose projects that deploy new broadband infrastructure, place infrastructure upgrade or extend existing infrastructure. Infrastructure can include but is not limited to cable, fiber, wireless, fixed wireless, and satellite. If your proposed projects are both infrastructure related, they should be proposed as 1 project and described in 1 project narrative. But I also want to make sure that you are aware that and be informed that there is no duplication of activities. So please make sure that there is no overlap in these projects.
Crystal, Vanessa's audio wasn't great. Will you go over that one more time, please?
Yes, I would be happy to. Sorry about that. So really what you're wanting to do is when you're deploying new broadband, when you're deploying new broadband infrastructure, replacing antiquated infrastructure or upgrading that extend existing infrastructure, the infrastructure can include, but is not limited to, cable, fiber, wireless, fixed wireless, and satellite. So what we really want to caution you on is duplication of services. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick, is an Nanska corporation able to apply for the broadband adoption program without a tribal resolution or letter of commitment?
Thanks for that question. So tribal consent is required only for broadband infrastructure deployment projects. You can see page 13 of the Nofo for more information on that. A letter of commitment is also not required for the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program.
Thank you. Amanda, are regulatory and permitting requirements an acceptable reason to ask for an extension?
Yes, absolutely. So completion of regulatory compliance and permitting requirements, including environmental requirements, are absolutely an acceptable reason to ask for an extension.
Thank you. Crystal, according to the project manager, every day counts immensely in large infrastructure projects. When asking for a 1-year extension for a total of a 2-year project period, does the project period start upon the issuance of the award letter or upon the signed acceptance of the award?
So the start of the award begins on the date listed on the notice of the award that is issued.
Perfect. Nick, is the purchase of an IRU for backhaul an allowable expense?
Great question. So an IRU is an eligible cost so long as the term is longer than 1 year. The grantee must make full payments for the IRU during the grant's period of performance, and the application should include a description of the proposed agreement, including its length. You can see eligible costs specific to broadband infrastructure deployment activities in the Nofo under section D7, subsection.
Nick's audio dropped. That was section D7B of the Nofo.
There you go. And can we just highlight one thing here? Because there's a number of you that have called. Good job, Nick. You guys can all tell we're struggling the irony of broadband connectivity in this conversation today, right? It looks like we're all having our moment. I want to highlight one thing because some of you have been calling about, hey, we don't have the full agreement knocked out yet, right? If you notice the language that Nick used here, that you should include a description of the proposed agreement, right? Do your best to describe what it is that you're trying to put together. We realize that we all can appreciate the timeline and the window that we've been working in, and that some of you are really trying to move at a fast pace and put the pieces together. So do your best to describe it. It's okay if you don't have every contract prepared or every agreement put together. We're going to work with you on that. Do your best to outline it, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Adam. Vanessa, will this grant support infrastructure for future development? And Vanessa does not have audio. So the Act requires eligible.
My phone.
There you go. Go ahead.
Okay. The Act requires eligible entities to complete their projects within 1 year of their receipt of grant funds. Therefore, applicants in their proposal should plan to spend their funds within 1 year.
Thank you. Gabe, our proposal is a hybrid solution that consists of expanding the existing gigabit passive optical network, private LTE, and microwave design that will extend service from the reservation's primary AT&T demarcation point to the dwellings. Is it okay to submit it as one application?
So we got to remember one application is only allowed per entity. So whether you're submitting, you only got that one application, keep to your page limit. Hybrid solutions are definitely allowed as long as there is no duplication and that we're servicing our community members.
Crystal, does a cover page on the project narrative section count as a page against the stated 20-page limit?
No, there aren't any cover letters that are required on this. So what you would want to do is probably include it as an attachment.
Thank you. And then the last question we're going to need clarifying on. So if someone can rephrase it into the question box, that would be awesome. It says, for tribes that don't have a broadband plan, can an application be used for an FCC license, say for the 2.5 gigahertz license and planning to build a robust network using funds being released later?
I'm a little unclear. If you already have a 2.5 license, I mean, that spectrum window is closed, right? So I'm assuming in that question that you're talking about using the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program funds to deploy your 2.5 spectrum. If that's the question, the answer is yes, you can absolutely, we would encourage you to use the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program funding to deploy your 2.5 spectrum, if that is the solution that you want to pursue. And I think to Gabe's point earlier, the big thing here, because I know some of you are looking at fiber, some of you are looking at 2.5, some of you are looking at a combination of fiber, 2.5, maybe other LTE components, or even LEO. What's important here is that you have, when you put your application together, it's, as Gabe said, it's okay to have more than one solution to solve the problems. However, you can only have one connection serving any individual household or anchor institution. So you need to make sure you're delineating what portion of the community is getting fiber, or what building is getting satellite, or what building is benefiting from the deployment of your 2.5. So it's okay to have multiple solutions, just make sure you don't duplicate the service to any one household or anchor institution.
Thank you. So far that looks like it's the end of all of our questions in the chat box. Oh, we just got one more. Can an application be used for planning? Adam, you're shaking your head.
I'm going to punt it to Nick. He actually shook his head before me.
I want to make sure that my mic is, can you hear me? All right. So yeah, that's great. With regards to planning grants, if a tribe is not in a place to build out infrastructure right now, an application can be used to provide adequate planning. However, you cannot apply for both infrastructure and building and planning in that. If you do apply for infrastructure grant and building infrastructure, there is a cap on that planning, which we can address.
Perfect, thank you. And that looks like that's the end of, oh, there's one more. Are most projects being developed in response to this grant funding opportunity, or have most projects been in the works prior to the opportunity? Crystal.
You saw me like squirming, ready to answer, right? So, you know, it's a mix. There are some that have been working on their projects for many years, but there are some who, as a result of COVID and quarantine and remote learning and remote employment, now they realize that they have to have that. So it's a mixture of both.
Perfect, thank you. NTA team, you're doing a great job. Grant writers appreciate your support. Thank you all for holding these questions and answers, along with the TA that you have provided. It is very much appreciated. Again, I'll say it again, if anyone has additional questions or you guys want further guidance, you have questions that are nuanced, please reach out to us individually and we'll set up a time to talk. If it's an official question, we'll have you submit it in writing so that we can respond officially as well, and then set up a time to talk. But that's what we're here for, and we want to get as much of this stuff answered ahead of time so that it makes your lives a little bit easier as you go through this process. The last question is, do we expect to have another round of this funding?
Maybe. I mean, I think we're all tracking. We got this question in a little bit different format yesterday, right? We're all tracking the infrastructure bill that just moved through the Senate. But as all of you that that are familiar with the process on the Hill, it now goes over to the House. And so we're really not able to speak to what may be at this point, right? We're hopeful that there will be more funding that comes to the program, but we really don't know, and we really can't speak with any certainty around that. Nick, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I do want to mention that if that question is specific to a second round of funding pertaining to funding outside of the 980 million that was established under the Consolidated Appropriations Act, our Nofo does state that if NTIA does not award all available grant funding for this program being the $980 million in the first round, we may use the remaining available funds in a second round of grant funding, which will be publicly announced through NTIA's issuance of a new Nofo. So I did want to separate that with the second round of funding for a separate legislative package versus a second round of funding for the current legislative package that was passed.
I think that's a good distinction, Nick, and I appreciate you raising that. And while we're on applications and talk a little bit about the money, we want to encourage everybody, especially for those of you that are working on your applications. I actually received an email while we're in the webinar today. There's a lot of you that have applications in the pipe, and we just wanted to remind everybody, please hit submit. There's a submit button in grants.gov. So just because you've uploaded your forms within grants.gov does not mean that you have formally submitted your application. So, and I'm saying this because we have a lot of applications that are pending, and it's August 12th, and it looks like a lot of you want to get your applications in soon. So just as a reminder, please hit submit. You got to hit the submit button.
Another question says, I expect that it is 100% the case that there will be no change to current TBCP timelines or grants, and that was directed at you, Adam.
Yeah, so again, bearer of bad news. None of us enjoy, frankly, none of us enjoy having to dance on some of these issues. But with this one, there's definitely no joy in delivering this. I mean, the reality is that the timeline for the application window was statutory, and Congress put a 90-day timeline in there, so that's in statute. So in order to modify that, that requires a change in statute. So as of where we are right now, the window is a firm window. You know, and I do want to address one other thing around that. As you heard when we started, we know some of your communities are being impacted by natural disasters, COVID spikes. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening right now. And again, we want to be respectful and acknowledge what you're going through. But again, I'm going to have to be the bearer of bad news. Doesn't matter what shape your application is in, right? I've received some questions, and so let's just talk about this quickly. We realize your community is being impacted. Submit your application in whatever format that you have, right? And we're going to do our best to cure the application when we get it on the back end. We can't do anything with it if you don't hit the submit button, if you don't submit something over to us. You know, if you're missing forms, or there's something that needs to be filled in your narrative, we can work to address that once you get an application submitted, okay? So please, respectfully, we know you're going through a lot. Do whatever you can to hit the send button, get some sort of an application into us so we can work through that with you. And again, our thoughts and prayers are with all of you that are going through these different experiences in your communities.
And final question before we move back to the slides. Does the funding appear to be oversubscribed?
You guys know we can't speak to that, but I appreciate the details. We are seeing a lot of applications, and from our perspective, the more applications, the better. There's a need out there. We've heard you loud and clear during the consultation, and I guess we'll just draw the line right there.
All right, so with that, we are going to go off camera and go back to the slides. So on the screen, a few of you have asked for our contact information. On the screen, you can see our contact information. Here's everyone's email addresses, our agency, our titles, all of that important stuff. Please reach out to us. Also, if you go to our Broadband USA website, you can also get the information there. You can also get information on past recordings, upcoming webinars, and anything else we have going on. All of the information is there. So thank you again to our speakers today and to all the attendees for joining. As a reminder, the presentation, transcript, and audio recording will be available on the website within 7 days. We will be back August 23rd and 24th for our next webinars. And again, Broadband USA website, there's a tribal page. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.